All right, good afternoon. It is such a pleasure to be here with you at the 2023 Disability and the Church Conference. Today I'm going to be sharing 3 things that you need to know about ministry evaluation. I am married to my, let's see, is our clicker? There it is. Perfect. I am married to my beautiful wife, Lori. We have 2 kids. Our daughter, Reagan, is 11. Our son, RJ, is 7. And we live in beautiful, sunny Southern California. And I've actually been passionate about children's and youth ministry pretty much my entire life. There's actually a point where I dreamed of going into the ministry full time. But as often happens, God had other plans. Instead of becoming a pastor, God called me to become a research and statistics professor. So that was a surprise. But as often happens as well, God brought these 2 passions together, and now I do research about children's ministry. So while I still am active in children's ministry at the church, there's a picture of last summer's vacation Bible school. I also teach research and psychology at California Baptist University. So today we are talking about ministry. You know, ministry, it can be stressful. I have a photo here of a very old man, and the caption says, "Who said pastoring a church is stressful? I'm 42 and feeling great." And one of the reasons that ministry can be stressful is because we're often working with limited resources. Here's a picture of a gentleman. He's squinting at a very tiny piece of paper, and the caption says, "A list of people volunteering for children's ministry." So on top of that, there are countless expectations for what other people expect those in ministry to accomplish. I saw this on Facebook a couple of weeks ago. Just as we are feeling confident and relaxed after finishing up Easter Sunday, VBS is right around the corner just waiting to pounce. So, given the high expectations and given the limited resources, how do we make decisions about which ministry programs to continue, which ones to change, and maybe even which ones to get rid of? Well, I think there are 4 main ways that we tend to make ministry programming decisions. The first one is tradition. We do what we have always done. We always do an Easter egg hunt on Sunday morning. If we don't do it this year, so many children are going to be disappointed. There's also what I call the philosophical assertion. You just kind of believe it to be true. Kids should be in corporate worship. That's just how it should be. I feel it in my very bones. Another approach is personal experience. You know, when I was a kid, we memorized Bible verses. I think it's about time that we bring that back. And finally, you've got popular trends. What are all the other churches doing? Trauma care is the big thing right now. Everyone else is talking about this, so maybe we should too. No, I'm not saying that any of these statements are necessarily true or false, except the last one, which definitely is true. But I'd like to invite you to look at programming decisions through a different lens. Through the lens of ministry evaluation. So what do I mean by that? When I say ministry evaluation, I mean having a clear ministry objective, measuring those outcomes, and then using that information to make decisions. And I believe there are 3 things that you need to know about ministry evaluation. The first thing that you need to know is that ministry evaluation, I believe, is appropriate. Now, I bring this up because there are a lot of folks who get a little uncomfortable when we start using scientific language to talk about ministry, right? They might feel like we are demanding a sign from God that he is truly working. And we all know what Jesus had to say about this. It is an evil and adulterous generation that craves for a sign. But we are not asking for God to prove himself like the Pharisees were. Our attitude is a little bit closer to Gideon's in Judges 6. It says, "The Lord answered, I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive. Gideon replied, if now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me." So like Gideon, we are prepared to trust and obey God's leading. But sometimes it can be difficult to discern God's voice. I think in the story from Judges, Gideon is thinking to himself, I think I hear God telling me to go kill like 1,000 people. Let's make sure this is really from God. Now for us, the consequences may not be that dramatic, but we do make decisions that influence and affect a lot of people. And I believe that when we approach these decisions with an attitude of faith and obedience, it's reasonable to look for evidence that we are following God's calling. Another challenge that people sometimes have is the awareness that much of our impact goes unseen, for better or for worse. J. Asher said, "No one knows for certain how much impact they have on the lives of others. Oftentimes we have no clue." And this is especially true in ministry. We believe in an invisible God. We intentionally plant seeds that other people will harvest. And we don't expect to see the completion of God's work on this side of heaven. But even though most of our impact will be unseen, I believe that we should still expect to see some observable evidence of God's hand in our ministries. I think it's intentional that David uses empirical, sensory language in the Psalms. After God delivered him from danger, David wrote, "Taste and see that the Lord is good." David's trust in God is rooted in a long history of God's faithful, observable provision. In the same way, I think we should ultimately expect to see a legacy of observable fruit in our ministries. Finally, I think people sometimes avoid talking about numbers because they know that there might just be that one child who needed a special touch from God that morning. As Barack Obama said, if there is a step that we can take that will save even one child, we should take that step. Now, the former president was talking about something else, but sometimes we apply that same logic to our ministries. We had a massive VBS program with hundreds of kids, and if even one child was saved, it was worth it, right? Well, maybe it was. After all, Jesus leaves the 99 to seek the outlier. But I do want to caution us about three things. First, this one child we talk about is often theoretical. You haven't actually met this child. We just kind of hope they exist because our event was not well attended. Second, the one child is typically anecdotal, right? You've heard a story and it's encouraging, but you don't know if 10 other children had the opposite experience and they just didn't tell you. And third, this mindset ignores the opportunity cost. What did we have to give up, knowingly or possibly unknowingly, to save this one child? Let me explain what I mean by that. Several years ago, I had a fascinating conversation with a representative from the Bolthouse Foundation. Now, his job was to review applications and decide which ministries would receive grant funding and which ones wouldn't. He said it was frustrating because a ministry would show up asking him for hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding with zero evidence whatsoever that they were accomplishing anything. And we'd ask them, "Why does your ministry deserve $100,000? And they would say usually something along these lines, "Well, if one child is saved, it'll be worth it." And a little bit to my surprise, he said, "Nope, that's not true. Because if I give the money to someone else, maybe 2 children will be saved. Maybe 12, maybe 100, maybe 1,000. We only have so much money. There's not enough to go around, so we have to pick and choose. And we need our ministries that come to us to provide evidence that God is at work in their ministry and that they are being good stewards of the resources that God has given to them." Now, you may not run a foundation, but your situation isn't entirely different, right? Your ministry has finite resources. You only have so much money. You only have so much energy, creativity, focus, and nowadays especially, only so many volunteers. As Jesus said in Luke 10, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. So we can't do everything, and like that foundation, we have to pick and choose. But is there a way to figure out which ministry programs are yielding the most fruit? So that brings me to the second thing that you need to know about ministry evaluation. Ministry evaluation is possible. At first, this might seem hard to believe. After all, how could you measure the work of the Holy Spirit in the life of a child? Well, it doesn't always have to be very complicated. One example of simple ministry evaluation is simply just keeping track of attendance. Now again, numbers are not everything, right? How many people are there isn't the end of the story, but it can give us some clues to what's resonating and what maybe isn't meeting a need. For example, at the children's ministry in our church a little while back, we had a game night, special event for 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. Now at the time, about 30 kids would show up on a Sunday morning, but over 75 kids showed up to the game night. We thought, maybe there's a need for this kind of ministry. Now conversely, if your Wednesday night program has dwindled from 30 kids down to 3 kids, it's possible that it's not working anymore, right? Maybe it's no longer meeting a need. What else can we use? Another example would be, let me go back. There it is. Another example would be tracking spiritual milestones. So faith decisions and baptisms. And on top of that, maybe keeping track of how many visitors the kids bring with them to church. So a good friend of mine, Dr. Leon Blanchette, over at Olivet Nazarene University, he used this metric in his doctoral dissertation. So he compared two kinds of children's ministries, those that really focus on fun and games to those that really focus on creating authentic, intimate worship experiences. And what he found out was that the kids who were in the ministries that focused on authentic worship were more likely to invite their friends to church. So by doing ministry evaluation, he gained insight into what it was that was attracting kids into the ministry. Finally, asking questions. Instead of relying on people to bring anecdotes to you, we want to ask questions systematically. So if you want to know if the new curriculum is working, go to all the Sunday school teachers and say, hey, how's the curriculum working? How are the kids responding to it? You might find that the younger kids are responding well, but the older kids are responding poorly. Maybe they need something different. Or you might find out that no one is even using the curriculum at all, and you're spending a lot of money on nothing. So, there we go. Now, of course, ministry evaluation can get a little bit fancier. Now, my wife and I are longtime friends of Every Generation Ministries. This is an organization that trains ministry leaders and volunteers in different parts of the world. Their goal is to help churches cultivate spiritual transformation in children's lives. Several years ago, they decided that they wanted to evaluate their ministry to see if they were accomplishing their mission. That was a little bit more complicated, but here's what we did. We recruited 35 different churches from their network in Mexico, Argentina, and Chile. Some of these churches got the training. They went in there and they trained their teams right away. That was our treatment group, to use research language. Some of them had to wait a few months before they could get the training, and that was our control group. To measure spiritual transformation, we created a survey based on the fruit of the Spirit from Galatians 5. Then we had the kids in each church complete the survey before the training, 2 months after the training, and then again 4 months after the training. And it turned out that the kids in the churches who did the training ended up a lot better off than those in the churches who didn't. There was more observable evidence of the fruit of the Spirit in their lives. In other words, EGM's ministry was having a measurable, discernible impact on kids' lives. On top of that, EGM compared two different versions of their curriculum, and they found out that one was a lot better than the other, so in the future, they could focus on the training that was the most effective. Now, I know there might be people here who do not like numbers, so I'm going to give you a completely different approach. The way this works is you give kids some paper and some art supplies, and you tell them, I want you to draw a picture of you and God. Draw it any way you want. Just put down the first thing that comes to mind. And after they finish drawing their picture, you say, can you explain your picture to me? Tell me all about it. So I had my own kids do this exercise so I could show you an example. My daughter drew this one. So during our older kids' worship service at church, sometimes we have something that we call God time. And we rope off part of the room, and during one of the more reverent worship songs, the children have the option of coming into this circle where we have a candle representing God's presence, and they can pray. So when I asked my daughter to draw a picture of her and God, this was the first thing that came to mind. So I thought to myself, you know what? This is one piece of evidence that maybe this God time portion of our ministry is helping her connect spiritually, connect to God. My son drew this one. Yeah. So as he explained, he is the figure in the front, and the kind of glowing, floating figure in the back with razor-sharp teeth is God. I asked him about the red circles, and he said that God was hurling asteroids at the earth. His group doesn't do God time. So, and that's going to bring us to the next point I want to make about ministry evaluation, is that ministry evaluation is worth it. Now, it can be a little bit scary. You might find out that none of your fifth graders can look up a Bible verse. You might find out it's time to let go of one of your favorite programs. Or you might learn that your 7-year-old imagines God as a floating beast in the sky hurling asteroids at the earth. But hey, now you have identified some potential growth opportunities. Ministry evaluation also creates intentionality and shared vision. When you have a measurable goal, everyone can see what you're trying to accomplish. For example, I'm currently working with a ministry in Southern California to help them develop a supportive small group program for their elementary grades. So we had to talk through and figure out, well, what do we mean by supportive? And then select a survey. That was the type of measure we decided to use in this study that represents what we mean by supportive. So we gave the survey to all of their kids before their small group program began. And then we're going to do it again a little bit later before the school year is over. And we're going to simply look at the numbers and see, do the kids feel more supported after the program was initiated than they did before? And because all of the volunteers are aware of the survey, they can keep this in the back of their minds as they're working with the kids. They know what they're trying to do, and that helps them focus the ministry. As the saying goes, that which gets measured gets done. Another thing that makes ministry evaluation worth it is that it helps guide decision making. Now, this has definitely been valuable to us in our own ministry work. Right now, our team is focused on something called the Reach Hurting Kids Workshop, and that's a training program that teaches children's ministry staff and volunteers how to work with kids who have experienced trauma. Now, the first version of this workshop was taught by experts, so we would go into a church as outsiders and develop that team. The problem was there were a lot of ministries that wanted to be equipped in this area, and there were not very many of us to go around. So that's when we came up with the idea of developing a self-guided version of our workshop. The idea being that a children's ministry leader could use our materials to train their own team. But would it be as effective? So what did we do? We ran an experiment. We evaluated our ministry. So we compared the two versions of the workshop. Some churches did one, some churches did the other one. And then in the end, we found out that the self-guided churches, that training was about as 90% as effective as when we did it. So we thought, that's pretty good. So we decided to move forward with this self-guided version, and now there's churches all over the place using this and having a lot of success with it. Finally, and this last one is really important, ministry evaluation can be encouraging. It can encourage the team. I like to compare it to going on a diet. You start exercising, you cut back on sweets, you're eating all your veggies, and one day, you step on the bathroom scale and wow, I lost 3 pounds. All of that sacrifice is paying off. My diet is working, right? That makes it a lot easier to keep going. I think the same is true in ministry. When you evaluate your ministry, it gives you the chance to see, even in some small way, that the sacrifice and the hard work is paying off. Even a small amount of progress can be so encouraging, and it can help you to keep going when things are hard. On a personal note, I think this has helped me a lot over the past year as we began our ministry. I am a natural cynic, a natural skeptic, and I always question, is this working? Is this going to make a difference? And as we were developing the Reach Hurting Kids Institute, I always was wondering about this. It's really hard to start a ministry and to keep a ministry going. It would have been much easier just to quit and let it go and do something that was much easier. But as we evaluated our ministry work, as we looked at the data, there was encouragement. I said, oh, look what happened in this church. Look what happened here. Look at the numbers here. I saw, oh, this is making a difference, right? We're seeing transformation in churches. And so I felt compelled. I have an obligation now to continue the ministry and keep doing what we're doing because we're transforming and we're empowering churches. So as we end our time together, I hope that you are also encouraged and inspired by this conversation. I pray God's blessing over you and your ministries as you seek to follow his will and reach your congregations and your communities for Jesus. Thank you so much for listening, and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.